Hello, my friend, or perhaps I should say good evening, fellow traveler in time. Wherever you are, maybe curled beneath a blanket, maybe with the hum of a quiet room around you, I'd like to invite you to sink into something slow. Not the kind of slow that feels heavy, but the kind of slow that lets your mind uncoil from the demands of the day, loosening its grip on urgency. Tonight, we're not rushing anywhere. We're not here to learn history the way textbooks demand dates in neat rows and names like dried leaves pressed between the same old pages. No. Tonight, we're here to drift back, to walk without haste through alleyways that haven't existed for hundreds of years, to follow the faint trail of a story you may never have heard. But before we step across that threshold, I wonder, have you ever considered how different life feels when bathing is not a habit, but an event? Not a daily interruption, not even a weekly refresh, but a rare occasion marked on the year as carefully as a festival. Imagine that for a moment. The heat of water against your skin not as something you expect, but as something almost ceremonial, something you might wait months for. What would that do to the air around you, to the smell of the streets, to the way people moved close or stepped back? And if I told you we are not about to wander into the perfumed halls of nobles or the spotless cloisters of monks, but instead into the cramped, shadowed world of women whose profession was older than the cities they served. Women for whom survival meant selling a kind of intimacy that existed in defiance of filth, in rooms where the air grew thick long before the candles guttered. Would you stay with me? I think you will. Hi, friend. Hi, listener. Hi, you who have found this quiet corner of the night. You might be here for the strange, or for the truth, or for that peculiar mixture of the two that makes history so magnetic. And maybe, just maybe, you're here because the lives we're about to unfold are so far removed from your own that they can't help but cast a shadow across the comfort you sit in now. That's the strange gift of looking back. We learn what was endured, what was considered normal, and what faded away without anyone stopping to mourn it. So here is the street, not the bright main road, but the narrow one just behind it. Cobblestones uneven, wet in places where the night soil cart has passed. The air has the layered smell of humanity pressed too close, sweat that is soaked into fabric and never truly left, beer spilled into dirt and dried there, smoke from a dozen hearths drifting low because the wind tonight is lazy. There is music somewhere, thin and wavering a fiddle, perhaps, but it's not from this street. Here, the sounds are more muffled. Low voices, footsteps, the faint clink of coins, the creak of a door that opens just far enough to let a man slip through. You and I, we aren't in a hurry to follow him. We're content to let our gaze wander along the line of buildings, some with shutters closed tight, others with a faint glow leaking through the cracks. The women here, they are not strangers to being looked at. Some lean against doorways as if they are part of the wood itself, eyes catching the lamplight, skin pale or shadowed depending on where they stand. Their dresses are worn, the colors dulled by use and by washing in water that never truly runs clear. But it's not the dresses that hold our attention. It's the quiet knowledge in their faces. They know the weight of the night. They know the rhythm of footsteps on this street. They know when a man is coming to spend coin and when he is just passing through. And here's the truth, we must hold gently. These women bathe, perhaps, once a year. Not because they enjoy the feeling of grime, not because they don't understand the relief of cleanliness, but because the world they inhabit does not bend to such luxuries. Water is heavy to carry, firewood costs, coin, and in rooms where every corner is already claimed by something: a bed, a table, a basin, a body, there is little space for indulgence. Soap, when it can be had, is harsh, biting at the skin like an impatient creditor, so they make do with less. A splash of water here and there, a cloth to wipe away what can be reached, powders to mask what cannot. Does it surprise you? Or does it feel inevitable that those who sell a form of closeness might live in conditions where the skin itself carries the record of every encounter, every night spent under the press of another's breath? And yet, the work goes on. Desire, after all, is stubborn. It will make its way through dirt and shadow if it must. I ask you not to answer aloud, but to let the question settle. How does one keep a sense of self when the world reduces you to a function? How do you hold on to some inner place that is untouched when your body is as much a part of the city's commerce as the barrels of ale rolling into the taverns? I wonder if, for some, the rare bath was not just about washing away the filth, but about remembering that they were more than their work. Even if the clean skin would not last, even if by nightfall the scent of smoke and sweat returned, perhaps for a few hours they could breathe differently. We'll get there, but not yet. Tonight, we will move slowly, because haste would blur the edges, and the edges matter. We will linger in the textures, in the way the walls here lean as if tired, in the sound of boots on stone, in the quiet moments between transactions, when the women lean back and look up at the strip of sky between the roofs. They can see the stars from here. If the smoke thins, I imagine the stars look the same as they do to you now. Hello again, my friend. I say it more than once because, in a way, this whole telling is just a conversation between us, stretched thin over the centuries. I'll keep speaking quietly, so your thoughts can move in and out, like the tide under a soft moon. Perhaps you've walked in a modern city at night, passing bars or clubs, where the laughter spills out with the music, where perfumes rise like banners above the crowd. This is not that. Here, the night is heavier, the air thicker, the transactions more silent. There is no electricity to burn away the dark, only the dim oil lamps, their flames bending when the door opens and the cold air rushes in. And in that flicker, you see it the way the light paints every flaw and every strength on the women's faces. Lines that are not just from age, but from years of late hours and smoke-filled rooms. Eyes that have learned to read the truth in a man's walk before he speaks a word. You and I, we will follow them through the year, through the slow accumulation of grime and powder, through the moments when the scent in the room changes because it is time for the once-a-year bath. But before we cross that threshold, we must understand the world they live in. Because history, as much as it loves kings and battles, is built just as much from streets like this. From the lives that were lived in the shadows of walls no one bothered to write about. And so, I'll ask again, are you ready to walk with me? Not quickly, not as a tourist passing through, but as someone who will stop and notice the way the lamplight catches the curve of the cobblestones, the way the cold creeps in through the gaps in the wood, the way the air tastes when you're close enough to the river to smell it but too far to hear it. Are you ready to keep pace with lives that move differently, in a rhythm set not by clocks, but by hunger, by opportunity, by survival? If you are, then let's begin. Not at the bath itself, not yet. Let's begin in the long stretch between baths, in the days and nights that make the rare cleansing into an almost sacred event. Let's begin with the feeling of the first warm day after winter, when the air shifts just enough to carry new scents into the street. Let's begin with the way a woman might touch the edge of her sleeve to her face, not to wipe away sweat, but to test if the powder still lingers. And let's begin with the sound not of laughter, not of song, but of the street breathing, the quiet chorus of lives being lived in close quarters. This is where we are. This is where we'll stay, for as long as it takes to understand. And when we move, we'll move gently. Then let us step further in, my friend, slow as a tide that knows the shore will wait. The night is our companion, and it does not rush us. We have left behind the first impressions of that narrow street, but we are still inside its breath, the way the air clings, the way the stones remember every boot that has crossed them. Now, our path takes us not just past doorways, but into one. Not as a paying guest, not as a shadow in the corner, but as a silent witness, one who will not disturb the patterns of this place. The door yields with a muted creak, the wood swollen by years of damp winters and summers heavy with humidity. Inside, the air changes, not cleaner, not fresher, but closer, as though the walls themselves are leaning in to listen to the lives within. A small fire struggles in the hearth, its light spilling weakly over a table scarred by years of use. The table is pushed to one side, making room for the bed that dominates the space. It is not the bed of noble comfort. There is no carved frame, no soft down mattress. Instead, the frame is simple wood, and the mattress is little more than a thick sack stuffed with straw. The scent of it, a mixture of dry grass and the faint tang of old sweat. The sheets, if one can call them, that are a faded linen, washed when possible, but long past the point of ever appearing white again. In the corner, there is a basin, but tonight it is empty. It will remain so most nights, except for those rare occasions when water is fetched in quantities large enough for washing more than hands and face. For now, the only water in this room rests in a clay jug, meant for drinking, though even that carries the faint, earthy taste of the river. On the wall hangs a small looking glass, its surface warped with age, so that the face reflected there is never quite one's own, but a softer, blurred version. A kindness, perhaps, in a life where the mirror tells too much truth. And here she island, we will call her Elise, though her true name has long since been traded for one easier on the ear. She sits on the edge of the bed, hair loosened from its pins, so that it falls in waves over her shoulders. The strands are heavy, darker near the roots, lighter where the ends have been scorched by summer sun, streaming through the open window of many rooms like this. She holds a small pot in her lap, not a pot of food, but of powder. It is pale, almost chalky, and she dips her fingers into it with the familiarity of habit. A touch to the forehead, the cheeks, the curve of the neck. The powder does not clean, but it disguises. It blurs the shine of skin that has gone too long without true washing, masks the scent that clings despite the quick wipes with a damp cloth in the morning. Her gown tonight is deep red, though the fabric's sheen has dulled. Once, it might have drawn eyes from across the room, but now it works more like a signal this is a woman who knows her trade, who has worn this same gown through countless nights, who understands that men care less for the newness of cloth than for the promise it wraps. The gown is cut low, though the candlelight softens the effect. Around her neck, a thin ribbon, black, frayed at the ends, rests like a line drawn between what she gives and what she keeps for herself. She is waiting. The street outside dictates her rhythm, and tonight it is neither slow nor hurried. Each footstep beyond the door is measured unconsciously, a silent counting of possibility. Her ears are trained to separate the sounds, the uneven gait of a drunkard, the steady approach of a man who has made up his mind, the hurried scurry of someone with no intention of stopping. This skill to read desire in footsteps is one that no one taught her, yet it has kept her in coin longer than her youth might have alone. And as she waits, she does not think of the bath that will come in months. Not because she does not long for it, she does. In a way she does not speak of, but because longing for it now would be like staring at a horizon one will not reach until the seasons have changed twice over. Instead, she focuses on the immediate, the powder applied just so, the ribbon smoothed, the smile shaped in advance. Cleanliness, in this world, is a luxury deferred. Presentation is the currency that can be managed daily. There is movement near the doorway, a shadow that pauses. The latch lifts, and the space between street and room breathes for a moment before closing again. A man enters, his face familiar to her, though not by name. They have met before, in this same room, under the same firelight. He does not notice the powder, or if he does not care. He does not think of the months between her last bath and now. His world does not extend into hers beyond the span of a single night. And this, too, she knows. She rises. Not quickly, not with the nervous energy of one hoping to please, but with the steady grace of someone who has done this more times than she has counted. There is no embarrassment in the closeness that follows, no pretense that they are anything other than two people enacting a transaction older than the city's walls. But for us, for the watcher, there is an awareness of all the layers here. The powder masking the skin, the fabric holding warmth and scent, the hair that moves like a veil between her and the world. When the door closes behind him later, and she is alone again, the room seems smaller. The fire burns lower. She sits once more on the bed, reaching for the clay jug. The water is cool, and she takes a slow drink, letting it sit on her tongue before swallowing. A small cloth rests beside the jug, and she uses it to wipe her face, careful not to wet the powder too much. This, here, is the closest she will come to bathing tonight. Tomorrow, she will do the same. And the next night. And the next, until the appointed time comes, when she will walk perhaps with other women to the place where water is heated in great tubs, where for a few hours, the world smells different. But between now and then lies the life we must understand. The waking each day to the same air, the same walls, the same balance between hiding and revealing. The way cleanliness becomes not a state, but a memory one revisits in the mind until the body can follow. Outside, the street has quieted. Somewhere, a door slams. Somewhere else, a dog barks once, twice, then falls silent. The night holds steady, and Elise stretches out on the bed, eyes tracing the shadows on the ceiling. She will sleep soon, though not deeply. The air in here carries every sound, the shuffle of footsteps outside, the murmur of voices, the wind moving against the shutters. Her body rests, but her mind keeps time with the street, ready to wake if the latch lifts again. And so the days pass, indistinct yet distinct. Each night much like the one before, yet each with its own small variations, a different voice at the door, a different coin left on the table, a different pattern in the candles melting. Through it all, the slow accumulation continues. The scent of smoke in her hair, the faint layer of powder on her skin, the feel of fabric that has known her shape for years. This is not neglect in the way we might imagine it now. This is adaptation. This is what it means to live in a world where water is precious, where warmth costs coin, where a woman's worth in the eyes of her trade is measured not by the cleanness of her skin, but by the skill with which she presents herself. We will stay with her through these months, my friend. We will learn to see the rhythm she moves in, to understand how a single bath can hold such meaning, not just for the body, but for the spirit. But that moment is still far ahead. For now, we are here, in this room, with the fire low and the street breathing just beyond the door. And in the stillness between one footstep and the next, we can almost hear the city itself, its heartbeat slow, its breath warm, its memory deep. The days stretch onward, my friend, not in a rush, but in that steady, looping way a clock without hands might measure time. Outside, the seasons are shifting in increments so small they seem almost imagined, a little less frost clinging to the edges of the cobblestones, a little more murmur of merchants returning to the marketplace with goods not seen since autumn. Inside, Elise moves through her routines as though she is tracing the same worn path in the floorboards, the faint dips beneath her feet, marking where her weight has leaned 1,000 times before. This morning is brighter than most. Not because the air is clean, it never truly is, but because the sunlight has slipped in at just the right angle through the narrow gap between buildings, brushing across the far wall in a pale strip. Elise notices it as she sits at the table, slicing a piece of bread that has gone hard enough to resist the knife. She holds it steady with her fingers, feeling the resistance of the crust, and when it finally gives way, the sound is loud in the small space. She chews slowly, not from savoring but from necessity, softening each bite with a sip of watered ale. Bread, ale, a wedge of cheese, these are the constants, as unchanging as the scent of smoke in the air. There is no hurry to the morning. Clients rarely come at this hour. Those who do are often the most desperate or the most careless, and they are unpredictable in their ways. She has learned to keep mornings for herself, or as much of herself as this life allows. It is in these hours that she tends to the small tasks that keep the world from swallowing her whole, mending a tear in her gown, scraping the wax from the sides of the candle holder, polishing the buckle on her shoe until it catches even the weakest light. These acts are not vanity. They are survival. A polished buckle might catch an eye before a worn hem does. And in this trade, the smallest shifts in presentation can tip the balance. From the street below, voices rise and fall. The market is alive again after the long, lean winter. Fishmongers calling out their catch, the thick accents of traders from other towns carrying strange vowels into the air. And under it all, the sound of wheels, cart after cart rolling over the stones, each one carrying goods, and with them, the possibility of new scents to mingle in the street's crowded breath. Elise listens without leaning to the window. She knows too well that the street looks much the same from day to day, even when the voices change. Still, the warmer days bring with them a different kind of work. Men linger longer in the street when the wind doesn't bite so sharply. They stop to drink outside the taverns, to talk, to laugh, and sometimes to notice the women standing in the doorways. Elise will be there too, later, but for now she remains in the half-light of her room, her fingers tracing the rim of the empty basin as though to remind herself of its purpose. In a few months, she will stand over it with water, warm enough to steam, scrubbing her arms until the skin feels unfamiliar in its smoothness. But that is still a distant thing, and so she lets her hand fall away, reaching instead for the pot of powder. A light touch along the jawline, a dab at the temples, the careful blending that turns effort into the illusion of effortlessness. The knock at the door comes just before midday, 2 quick taps, a pause, then another. She knows this pattern. It is Pr0, a woman from 2 doors down, one of the few Elise speaks to without calculation. When Elise opens the door, Pr0 slips in, her cloak smelling faintly of salt fish and damp wool. They exchange no greetings. In this world, such courtesies are luxuries, saved for those who can afford idle talk. Instead, Pr0 sets a bundle on the table and begins to unwrap it. Scraps of cloth, bits of lace, a small tin of rose pomade, so faint in its scent that it must have been bought second-hand. They trade without words at first. Elise offers half her cheese in exchange for 2 lengths of ribbon, one black, one a deep green. Only after the trade is settled do they speak. The talk is quiet, the kind that carries no further than the table. They speak of a man who has been seen offering extra coin in the larger rooms near the square, of the woman who fell ill and has not been seen since, of the price of flour climbing again. Beneath the words, there is an unspoken current, a shared understanding that they are each other's weather vane, measuring which way the wind is shifting in a trade that changes faster than the seasons. When Pr0 leaves, the room feels different, not emptier, but heavier, as though the air has taken on the weight of their talk. Elise sets the green ribbon aside for another day and slips the black one around her neck, tying it with the precision of someone for whom small details are weapons. The afternoon will come soon enough, and with it, the slow drift of men from the taverns. She will stand in her doorway, not to call out, not to beckon, but simply to be seen, to be part of the street's unspoken promise. And yet, even as she prepares, her thoughts drift toward water. Not the tepid sips from the jug, not the damp cloth pressed against her skin in the mornings, but water enough to submerge, to let the body forget for a moment the constant press of fabric and air, thick with other people's breath. She pictures it as she has before, the steam curling upward, the heat loosening the tension in her shoulders, the way the scent of smoke and powder would be replaced, if only briefly, by something cleaner. It is a vision she keeps carefully tucked away, a small treasure she can pull out when the air grows too close. The day lengthens. Shadows lean across the cobblestones, stretching like tired animals. Elise takes her place at the doorway, the black ribbon cool against her skin, her gown arranged so that its wear is less visible in the fading light. She watches the street as it shifts from market to evening, the merchants packing their goods, the taverns filling, the stray dogs weaving between legs in search of scraps. The first man to pause before her does so with a glance that asks a question neither of them needs to voice. She steps aside, the door opening just enough for him to enter, the street closing behind him as though he had never been there at all. Inside, the routine unfolds with the familiarity of a song she has sung too many times to forget. When he leaves, the fire has burned lower, and the air has grown heavier. She sits at the table once more, fingers tracing the edge of the ribbon at her throat, listening to the muffled hum of the street outside. There is no rush to rise, no rush to change. The night is long, and she knows its rhythm. Later, when the street is quieter, she will lie down on the bed, the powder still clinging faintly to her skin, the scent of the day woven into her hair. She will close her eyes and let her thoughts drift not to dreams of escape, but to the image of water, warm and waiting, somewhere ahead in the months to come. And perhaps, in that space between waking and sleep, she will feel it for just a moment. The weight of the air lifting, the skin breathing freely, the world smelling of something other than survival. But for now, the basin in the corner remains empty, and the year moves forward in its slow, relentless way. Outside, the city breathes. Inside, so does she. The weeks slip past like a slow, deliberate hand turning the pages of a book that no one else can see, and the street changes its colors without ever truly changing its soul. The bite of winter is gone now, replaced by the kind of damp warmth that clings to skin and fabric alike. The sort that makes even clean clothes feel faintly lived in within hours. For Elise, it is a familiar shift, one that brings with it both relief and its own set of burdens. Cold robs the body of ease, but warmth draws the air closer, makes the scent of everything bread, smoke, bodies grow heavier. It is a time when the line between comfort and suffocation thins, and the rooms in which she works become less forgiving. This morning, the street hums earlier than usual. Somewhere beyond the next row of houses, A group of traders has arrived, their carts creaking under the weight of goods that carry the faint breath of far-off places. She can smell the difference in the air, the sharp tang of dried fish, the resin of fresh-cut wood, the faint spice of something she cannot name but has learned to recognize as foreign. The market swells with their presence, and so will the taverns tonight. The trickle of men down her street will become a steady stream, and with it, the rhythm of her day will bend accordingly. She rises slowly from the bed, her feet meeting the cool, uneven wood of the floor. The jug on the table holds what it always holds: water drawn yesterday. Not entirely clear, but serviceable. She pours a little into the basin, not enough to soak, just enough to dampen a cloth. The water is cool, the cloth coarse, and she presses it first to her neck, then her wrists, then behind her ears. The sensation is not luxury, it is necessity. A gesture that will not erase the life from her skin but will soften its edges for a little while. The black ribbon from yesterday has been replaced with the green one Pr0 traded to her. Against the faded red of her gown, it is a small act of color, a signal she does not name. She smooths it flat, then takes the pot of powder in her hands. The movement is slow, almost meditative, the dipping of fingers, the brushing across skin, the subtle pressing to blend it where the light will fall. Powder is not truth, but in her world, truth has never been the point. What matters is the story told in the space between what is seen and what is imagined. By the time she steps to the doorway, the sun is higher, turning the narrow street into a strip of gold and shadow. She stands just inside the threshold, where she can be seen without seeming to call attention to herself. The men who pass notice her, some with quick glances, others with the lingering kind that carry unspoken intent. She has learned to read those glances like lines in a palm, tracing the arc from interest to decision in the time it takes for a boot to lift and fall. One man stops. His clothes are better than most who pass this way. The seams clean, the fabric still holding its shape. He does not move like someone from the taverns. He moves like someone who has coin to spare and knows it. Elise meets his gaze briefly, then lets it slip away, as though the decision to follow him inside must be his alone. It is a small dance, but one she has perfected. When he steps toward the door, she moves aside, and the street folds around the absence of their presence. Inside, the air changes. The world beyond the walls becomes muffled, and the rhythm narrows to the space between two people. She does not rush. He does not linger on ceremony. There is no need for pretense here. Each knows the other's role. The boundaries drawn without words. When it is over, he leaves a coin heavier than usual on the table, and she notes it without comment. The weight of it in her palm is both a comfort and a reminder. Comfort because it will stretch her reach for the days ahead. Reminder because such generosity is rare and fleeting. When the door closes behind him, the fire crackles in the hearth, though it is little more than embers now. She sits for a while, letting the quiet settle. The green ribbon lies cool against her skin, and she touches it absently, as though it might anchor her in the stillness. Outside, the voices rise again, the market in full swing, the carts being unloaded, the calls of sellers ringing down the lanes. She will return to the doorway soon, but for now she stays in the dim interior, listening to the life outside as though it were a river passing near her window. Later in the afternoon, Pr0 appears again, this time without knocking, her expression sharper than before. She brings news of a raid in the larger houses by the square, the kind of raid that leaves the women shaken and the rooms temporarily closed. For Elise, it is both warning and opportunity. Men turned away from those doors will find others to knock on, and hers may be among them. The conversation is brief. Both know better than to linger on the edge of misfortune. When Pr0 leaves, Elise returns to her place at the threshold, the street's pulse steady beneath her feet. As the sun lowers, the crowd changes. The merchants are gone, their stalls empty or covered, and the taverns swell with men whose coin burns hot in their pockets. The laughter is louder now, the voices rougher. Elise watches, waiting not for the first man who looks her way, but for the right one, the one whose gaze lingers just long enough to be worth the effort. When he comes, she steps back without a word, and the street swallows the space they leave behind. The night stretches on in this way, a pattern of comings and goings, of moments that blend together until only the weight of coins in the small box under the bed marks the difference. Between each meeting, She returns to the table, to the jug, to the cloth. Each time, the water is a little lower, the air a little heavier, but the gestures remain the same. When at last the street quiets, she sits by the hearth, the embers casting a faint glow across her face. She unfastens the green ribbon, laying it on the table beside the pot of powder. In the silence, she can almost hear the sound of water, not the trickle from a jug, but the rush of it filling a tub, the steam rising in curls. It is not here, not now, but somewhere ahead, and the thought of it is enough to close the day. She lies down on the bed, the gown still clinging to her skin, the scent of the day settling into her hair. Her eyes follow the shifting shadows on the ceiling until they blur, and the room becomes nothing more than warmth and dark. Outside, the city exhales, and the night takes her in. The mornings are different now, not in the way a sunrise might paint the world in unexpected colors, but in the subtle shifts that only someone who lives inside the same four walls would notice. The light lingers a little longer before fading into shadow. The air, though still heavy, carries the faintest hint of grass somewhere far beyond the street. It is not enough to change the nature of the room, but it slips in like a half-remembered melody, a whisper from a place she cannot see. Elise wakes to it without moving, lying still on the bed, listening to the street as it rubs its eyes and begins the slow crawl toward another day. She rises without the ceremony of stretching or yawning. Her body has learned to move from stillness to purpose without that kind of indulgence. The floor is cool against her bare feet, a texture she knows as well as she knows the fabric of her gown. The jug on the table is not as full as she had hoped. Last night's work was steady, but not enough to justify the extra coin for a second trip to the well. She tips it anyway, pouring the water into the basin until it shivers against the ceramic. The sound is brief, gone almost as soon as it begins, and she takes the cloth from its hook, dipping it into the shallow pool. The touch of the damp cloth against her skin is almost startling at this hour. She presses it along her arms, her throat, across her collarbone. The coolness fades quickly, replaced by the familiar cling of air that has been breathed too many times. The powder will come later. For now, it is enough to feel the surface of her skin acknowledge the water, even in such a small way. She drapes the cloth back over the edge of the basin, knowing it will dry stiff before the day is over. From the street below, there is the sound of wood being split sharp, quick strikes that echo between the buildings. Someone calls out in a voice thick with sleep, and somewhere else a door bangs shut. The city is a creature that wakes in pieces, different parts stirring at different hours, and Elise has learned to listen for the sequence. When the fishmongers begin their shouts, the morning has truly begun. When the taverns drag their barrels out to the street, the afternoon has arrived. And when the first man pauses in front of her door with the kind of silence that carries weight, the night is ready to claim its share. But now, in this in-between, she moves through the quiet. She opens the small box beneath her bed, counting the coins by touch rather than sight. The edges are worn smooth, the surface is dulled, but the weight is the only measure that matters. It is not a fortune, but it is survival, and survival in her trade is measured one night at a time. She closes the box, sliding it back into its place, and takes her seat at the table. The gown she chooses today is darker, almost the color of wet earth. It hides more of the marks the weeks have left, not marks of violence or pain, but the slow, inevitable imprint of a life lived too close to too many others. She threads a length of ribbon through her hair, not to keep it neat, but to draw the eye away from what the gown cannot conceal. When she finally lifts the pot of powder, the gesture feels like the opening lines of a well-practiced song. Dip, brush, blend. The powder does not lie. It simply redirects the truth. By midday, the market noise has swelled to the point where it presses at her window. She steps into the doorway, not quite into the light, letting the rhythm of the street move around her. She is part of it, and apart from it, a figure that belongs to the scenery without ever blending in completely. Men pass, some glancing, some ignoring, some pausing long enough for the air between them to change. She does not hurry the moment. She never does. The first to stop today is a man whose clothes suggest travel dust on his boots, a crease in his cloak where it has been folded and unfolded too many times. He looks at her with the careful attention of someone weighing a purchase in the market, and she meets his gaze without offering anything more than presence. When he decides, It is with a small shift of his stance, and she moves aside for him to enter. Inside, the air folds over them like a blanket pulled from long use, warm, thick, and carrying the weight of every conversation, every breath that has filled the space before. There is no wasted movement, no need for explanation. When it is done, he leaves quietly, the door closing with the same muted creak it had when he entered. She stands for a moment, listening to his footsteps fade down the street, then returns to the table. The cloth in the basin is still damp from the morning. She lifts it, pressing it to her face for a moment before wiping along her neck. The gesture is almost automatic now, a ritual repeated between each encounter, not to erase what has passed, but to prepare for what will come next. She smooths the ribbon at her throat, checking the line where it rests against her skin, then reaches for the pot of powder once more. As the day tilts toward evening, the shadows stretch, and the air in the room grows warmer. She props the door open just enough for the night to find her. The taverns are already spilling voices into the street, the clatter of mugs against wood, the low rumble of songs half remembered. She watches, waiting not for the noise to settle but for the right moment to step into it. It comes with a man whose gaze does not dart or linger, but lands as if it already knows its path. She steps back for him, the door closing on the swell of the street outside. The night continues this way, in a series of openings and closings, each one a thread in the long fabric of her year. When the street finally grows quiet, she sits once more by the hearth, untying the ribbon from her hair. The powder has settled into the lines of her face. The cloth in the basin has dried to stiffness. She looks at them both without judgment. These are her tools, as much a part of her trade as the bed or the door or the small box under the floorboard. And somewhere beyond the turning of the weeks, the thought of the bath waits not as a dream, but as a certainty that will come when the time is right. For now, the city exhales into sleep, and so does she. The nights have begun to stretch, not in length, but in texture, as though the darkness itself has grown denser, holding more within it. There is a heaviness to the air that is not entirely from the weather, a slow saturation that seeps into the walls, the fabric, the skin. Elise feels it most when she first opens her eyes, when the stillness of the early hours carries the scent of the day before, as if nothing has been washed away but simply pressed deeper into the weave of things. She lies for a moment, not because she is reluctant to rise, but because she knows the day will unfold in the same patient rhythm it always does, and there is no need to rush toward it. When she does stand, her bare feet meet the floor with a soft thud, the wood cool enough to remind her that summer has not yet claimed the city. The jug on the table yields only a little water this morning, enough to wet the cloth but not enough to fill the basin. She does not hesitate. The motions are as familiar as breathing. The damp cloth brushes along the inside of her arms, the hollow of her throat, the back of her neck. It is not cleansing in the way the word is meant now, but it marks the threshold between night's residue and the day's demands. She sits for a while at the table, the light from the window tracing a pale rectangle across the worn surface. Her fingers move over the grain of the wood, following the grooves that time and use have carved there. There is something steadying in the feel of it, a reminder that the world holds shapes that last longer than a season, longer even than the life of the one who uses them. The pot of powder sits within reach, but she leaves it closed for now. There is still an hour before she will need it, and she allows herself the quiet. From the street below comes the uneven roll of a cart, the creak of its wheels complaining with each turn. A voice calls out not the sharp cry of a seller, but the low murmur of someone speaking to a companion walking beside them. The sound passes, replaced by the faint clatter of dishes from the tavern 2 doors down. The city is waking, and with it, the current of the day begins to move. When she finally lifts the pot of powder, the light has shifted enough to catch in the fine dust as she works it over her skin. Each touch is measured, each motion deliberate. She ties the ribbon at her neck, a deep brown today, the color of earth after rain. The gown she chooses is the one with the mended seam along the side. The stitch is invisible unless one knows where to look, and few bother to look that closely. She smooths the fabric over her hips, checks the fall of the sleeves, then steps to the doorway. The street is brighter now, the air warmer, though it still carries the lingering cool of early spring. She stands in her place, close enough to be seen but far enough back to let the threshold serve as a quiet boundary. The faces that pass are a mix of the familiar and the new men who have walked this way before, their eyes flicking toward her with recognition, and strangers whose gazes pause for just a fraction too long. A man stops, not entirely facing her at first, as if weighing whether to commit to the pause. She meets his glance with the calm neutrality that leaves the choice in his hands. When he steps forward, she opens the door just enough for him to slip inside, the sound of the street folding shut behind him. Inside, the air is warmer, the scent of the fire mingling with the faint perfume of the powder. The exchange is wordless, a pattern set long before this moment. When he leaves, the coin he leaves behind is smooth-edged, worn from years of changing hands. She turns it between her fingers before dropping it into the small box beneath the bed. The afternoon draws on, the light outside deepening, the voices in the street thickening with the sound of drink and the ease of men who have found their evening's footing. She stands again in the doorway, the ribbon at her throat, a small point of order in the growing looseness of the day. Another man stops, younger this time, his eyes quick and uncertain. She lets him linger in his uncertainty just long enough to make the decision his own, then moves aside to let him pass. When the door closes again, she pours the last of the jug into the basin. The cloth is cool in her hand, and she presses it to her face, the dampness carrying with it a fleeting freshness. She wipes along the line of her collarbone, down the length of her forearm, and then drapes the cloth over the edge of the basin once more. The powder is reapplied where it is faded, the ribbon smoothed where it is shifted. The night is far from over, and each meeting is its own small stage, its own quiet transaction in the theater of survival. By the time the street grows quiet, the fire has burned down to a low glow, casting soft shadows across the room. She unties the ribbon, sets it on the table, and closes the pot of powder. The cloth in the basin is stiff now, the water gone. She sits for a while in the dimness, listening to the muted breath of the city outside. Somewhere, far beyond these walls, the river moves in its constant way, carrying with it the memory of places cleaner, brighter, untouched by the street's weight. She has not seen it in months, but she can picture its surface in the early morning light, the way it would feel to plunge her hands into it, to lift the water to her face. The thought is enough to ease her into the slow unraveling that comes before sleep. She lies down on the bed, the fabric of her gown warming quickly against her skin, and lets the darkness take its time. The city exhales, and she with it, both of them sinking into the quiet that will, in its own time, give way to another day. By now, the days have settled into that quiet stretch where the seasons seem to hesitate, as though the city itself is holding its breath between one chapter and the next. The mornings arrive softer, with light that creeps in through the narrow space between buildings in a pale, patient spill. Elise wakes to that light without surprise. It does not rush her. It does not demand. It simply rests against the wall like a visitor who knows it will be let in eventually. She lies still for a moment, feeling the air in the room before moving. The night's breath still lingers there, heavy with the faint mix of smoke, fabric, and the residue of living too close to the same walls for too long. Her feet meet the floor, and the coolness climbs gently up her legs. She reaches for the jug without thinking, tilts it, and listens to the sound of the water as it meets the basin. It is not much, just enough to settle in a thin, rippling layer at the bottom. She dips the cloth, the fabric stiff from yesterday's drying, and watches the water seep through the fibers before lifting it to her skin. The first press of it against her neck is a small awakening, not of energy, but of awareness. She moves the cloth slowly, along the curve of her shoulders, over her wrists, letting the dampness linger in places that will be seen. The rest will wait. The rest always waits. The street outside begins to stir in uneven fragments, the hollow knock of a cartwheel against a stone, the scrape of a broom against wood, the low hum of someone speaking to themselves as they walk. Elise listens as she sits at the table, her eyes tracing the lines in the grain of the wood, the small cuts and burns that have been there longer than she has. The pot of powder sits nearby, closed, patient. She leaves it untouched for now, taking her time as the day builds outside her door. When she finally lifts the lid, the motion is unhurried. The fine dust clings to her fingers, catching what little light filters in. She brushes it along her jawline, her cheekbones, the hollow just above her collarbone. It is not a transformation, not in the way a stranger might imagine. but a softening and adjustment of the surface, so that it aligns with the story she must tell without words. The ribbon she chooses today is a muted gray, worn smooth at the edges, the kind of color that neither invites nor denies notice. She ties it with a small knot, feeling the light pressure at her throat, and smooths the ends so they fall evenly. By the time she steps into the doorway, the market is beginning its rise. Voices call out from a street over, their edges softened by the air between. The sun catches in the dust that hangs just above the cobblestones, turning it to gold for an instant before the movement of feet stirs it into nothing again. She stands where the shadow of the lintel falls across her, her figure framed but not illuminated. Men pass, some with their eyes fixed ahead, some with quick glances, a few with the measured look that speaks of weighing possibilities. She knows each type by the way they carry their shoulders, by the tension or looseness in their hands. The first to stop is a man with a hat pulled low, the brim hiding much of his face. He hesitates only long enough to let her see the decision in his posture before stepping forward. She moves aside, the door closing behind them, and the street goes on as if they were never there. Inside, the room feels as it always does in these moments, smaller, warmer, the air thick with the mingling of the present and the past. There is no performance beyond what habit has already rehearsed. There is only the exchange, the small rituals that exist in the space between two strangers. When he leaves, she touches the coin he leaves behind, weighing it in her palm before it joins the others in the box under the bed. The hours that follow are much the same in shape, but never in exactness. A different man, a different glance, a different way of stepping into the room. Between each, she returns to the basin, dipping the cloth again even when the water is cool and thin. She refreshes the powder where it has faded, smooths the ribbon when it shifts. These acts are not vanity but maintenance, a careful tending of the fragile layer that keeps her work moving forward. By late afternoon, the light outside has deepened, turning the narrow street into a corridor of shadow with only thin lines of gold clinging to the higher walls. The market has quieted. The taverns have begun their louder work. The air carries the scent of ale and meat, of smoke curling from kitchen fires. Elise stands again at her post, feeling the shift in the street's rhythm as surely as a sailor feels the change in the tide. The next man who stops does so with a quiet certainty. His clothes are travel-worn but clean, his hands steady. She watches the way he takes in the doorway, the street, her face. When he steps inside, it is without hesitation. The room accepts him as it accepts all who enter with a silence that is neither welcome nor refusal, only inevitability. When night finally folds itself over the city, the work slows. She closes the door for the last time that day. The street beyond it now a softer murmur. The basin holds only a trace of water, the cloth stiff and cool to the touch. She lays the ribbon on the table, closes the pot of powder, and lets the quiet seep in. The fire in the hearth has burned down to a deep orange glow, enough to paint the edges of the room in a kind of gentleness. She sits, her hands resting loosely in her lap, and lets her thoughts drift toward the bath that will come not soon, but eventually. She pictures it not as a dream but as a season in itself, one that arrives on its own terms. The heat of the water, the scent of steam, the way the air in her lungs would feel different. It is a thought she keeps like a coin tucked away, small but solid, something to return to when the days are long and the air in the room feels too close. She lies down at last, the weight of the day settling into her limbs. Outside, the city breathes in slow, steady waves, and she breathes with it, both of them carrying forward the quiet promise of another morning. The mornings have grown quieter in a way that only the careful ear notices, not an absence of sound, but a softening, as though the city itself has learned to step more lightly in these weeks. The air through the small gap in Elise's shutter feels less urgent now, slipping in without the bite of cold or the weight of damp heat. It carries with it a faint trace of something distant, perhaps grass or turned earth from the edge of the market road, though it is too faint to claim with certainty. She lies still for a while, letting that air pass over her, eyes open to the thin stripe of light that reaches across the ceiling and moves slowly toward the far wall. When she does rise, it is without ceremony. The wood under her feet is familiar, the slight give near the table leg, the smoother patch near the bed, where the grain has been worn down by years of steps and turns. The jug on the table holds enough to make the cloth heavy in her hand once she dips it into the basin. The coolness of the water is sharper today, or perhaps her skin is simply more awake to it. She presses it to her face first, holding it there a breath longer than usual, before drawing it down along her neck and over the line of her collarbone. She does not hurry the motions, though she knows the cloth will dry to stiffness again before night falls. The sound of a broom working across the street filters in, joined by the low conversation of two men passing beneath the window. She doesn't lean to look. She has learned there is little point in watching the morning's movements. The faces worth noticing appear later. For now, she moves to the table, running her fingers over the surface before drawing the pot of powder closer. The powder settles on her skin like a whisper, its pale cast catching the light where it falls across her cheek. She brushes it over the slope of her jaw, the hollows beside her nose, the soft skin beneath her eyes. The ribbon she chooses is narrow, the color of faded plum, and she ties it without checking the knot. Her fingers know the motion by memory. She smooths the ends against the hollow of her throat, feeling the faint line of pressure it leaves. By midday, the sound of the market reaches her fully, the rhythmic call of vendors, the clatter of crates, the rise and fall of bargaining voices. She steps into the doorway, positioning herself in the shade so the light falls just enough to catch her face without showing more than she intends. The street moves in a tide before her, each passerby a small current in its flow. The first man to pause is older, his shoulders rounded from years of carrying weight. His eyes meet hers only briefly, but it is enough. She leans back just slightly, and he takes the step forward that closes the space between them. Inside, the door shuts out the noise in an instant, leaving the two of them in the thick quiet of the room. The exchange is as familiar as breathing, the weight of his coin afterward as certain as the closing of the door behind him. She sets the coin into the small box beneath the bed, the sound of it landing against the other's soft and certain. Then she moves to the basin, dipping the cloth again, though the water has grown cooler in the shade. She wipes along the back of her neck, the inside of her elbows, restoring just enough freshness to face the next knock at the door. The powder is touched up where it is faded, the ribbon smoothed, and she takes her place again in the shadow of the doorway. The day continues in this rhythm, a series of brief crossings between the street and the room, each separated by the small rituals of water, cloth, powder, and ribbon. With each meeting, the air in the room shifts, taking on the echoes of the moment just past before settling into the background hum of the day. By the time the sun has lowered enough to draw long, thin shadows across the cobblestones, the market's voice has quieted and the taverns have taken its place. The air carries the scent of meat roasting, of ale foaming into mugs, of the faint char of wood smoke. She watches the men as they pass, noting the looseness in their steps, the easy slant of their shoulders. When one stops not abruptly, but as if arriving at a decision that had been forming all along, she steps aside for him. Night gathers slowly, wrapping the street in the dim warmth of oil lamps and the deeper glow of fires behind closed doors. Inside her own room, the hearth burns low, its light no more than a steady ember. She sits at the table, untying the ribbon from her neck and laying it flat beside the closed pot of powder. The basin holds little more than a shallow film of water now, but she dips the cloth one last time, pressing it to her skin as though sealing the day's work away. When she finally lies down, the weight of the day rests on her in the way a blanket might, not heavy enough to smother, but enough to remind her it is there. She closes her eyes to the faint sound of footsteps fading along the street, the slow heartbeat of the city settling into its night. And somewhere behind the ordinary closings of another day, the thought of the bath still waits unhurried, certain, like a season that will arrive in its own time, no matter how many nights lie between now and then. The city has begun to warm in a way that changes the very pace of the days. The mornings come earlier, the first pale light threading its way into the narrow lanes, long before most doors have opened. In Elise's room, the air moves differently now, carrying with it a faint looseness, as though the walls themselves are breathing more easily after months of holding in the weight of winter. She wakes to that subtle shift, her eyes opening not to cold shadows, but to a softness in the light that turns the edges of the room gentle. She lies still for a while, listening to the quiet outside, the muffled hum of a street that is only just beginning to remember it will be busy again. When she rises, it is with the same slow certainty that marks the start of all her days, but there is less hesitation in her movements. The jug on the table feels heavier in her hands, its contents cooler from the night air. She tips it into the basin, watching the thin current swirl until it stills. The cloth dips into it, soaking through, and she lifts it with care, the weight of the water pulling gently against her fingers. She presses it first to her face, eyes closed, letting the dampness sink in, then along the side of her neck, over her shoulders, down her arms. These are the places that meet the world first, the places that will speak for her before she says a word. From the street comes the sound of shutters opening, wood against wood. The familiar creak of hinges that have never known oil. Someone calls a greeting, answered by another voice, and then the clink of a bucket being set down on stone. She does not lean toward the sound. She knows the street well enough to picture the movements without seeing them. Instead, she moves to the table, sets down the cloth, and draws the pot of powder closer. The powder's texture is fine and dry between her fingertips, and she works it over her skin in slow, measured motions. It catches the morning light where it falls across her cheek, softening the lines that the night leaves behind. The ribbon she chooses today is a deep, worn blue, the color of cloth that has been washed and sun-dried too many times to remember its first shade. She ties it at her throat, the knot resting just so, and smooths the ends with the flat of her fingers. By the time she steps into the doorway, the street has begun its gradual shift toward the day's rhythm. The merchants are setting up in the distance, their voices carrying in fragments. The air smells faintly of bread, the warm, yeasty scent drifting from somewhere beyond the square. She stands in the shadow of the lintel, her figure framed but not fully revealed, and watches as the tide of footsteps begins to pass. The first to pause is a man with the look of someone who has been drinking since the night before. His gaze lingers, but without decision, and she lets him pass without movement. The second is different, younger, sharper in his focus. He meets her eyes for just long enough to make the moment stretch, then steps forward. She moves aside, the door closing on the noise of the street, and the two of them vanish into the smaller world of the room. Inside, the quiet is immediate, the air thick with the scent of the fire and the faint trace of her powder. The meeting is brief, contained within the bounds that neither speaks aloud. When he leaves, she takes the coin he sets down, its edge catching the light for an instant before it disappears into the small box beneath the bed. She returns to the basin, the cloth still damp from earlier. It brushes her skin with the coolness that remains, wiping along the hollow of her collarbone, the inside of her elbows. The powder is touched up, the ribbon smoothed, and she returns to the doorway as though no time has passed at all. Through the afternoon, the pattern continues the slow pull of the street, drawing men toward her door. The brief eclipsing of the outside world within the room, the return to her small rituals of cloth and powder in between. Each man is different, yet the spaces they leave behind feel the same, folding back into the air as though they had never been there. By the time the sun begins to lower, the market has faded into the louder life of the taverns. The smells have shifted, less bread now, more ale and roasting meat. The laughter in the street has a looseness to it, voices spilling over each other without care. Elise stands at her post, watching the way the light thins between the buildings, the way the shadows stretch long and slow across the stones. The last man of the evening comes just as the lamps are being lit. His step is steady, his gaze direct, and she knows before he stops that he will not pass by. Inside, the room accepts him as it has all the others, with the even stillness that makes no judgment. When he leaves, she closes the door fully for the first time that day, the latch falling into place with a small, final sound. The basin holds little water now, but enough for her to wet the cloth one last time. She wipes her face, her neck, the backs of her hands. The ribbon is untied, the powder closed away. The fire in the hearth has burned low, its glow softening the edges of the room. She sits for a while, her hands resting in her lap, listening to the city outside as it exhales into the night. Somewhere in the distance, laughter still drifts upward, mingling with the faint scent of smoke. When she lies down, the air feels different, not cleaner, not lighter, but still touched by that morning softness. And in the space between wakefulness and sleep, she imagines the water she will one day stand in again, the way it will hold her for those brief hours, as though it has been waiting all along. The mornings have begun to open with a certain brightness that slips in before the rest of the city is ready to notice. It is not the harsh brilliance of midsummer, nor the thin, reluctant light of winter's end, but something in between, a pale gold that seems to pause on the threshold before fully stepping into the street. Elise wakes to it without turning her head, feeling it rest on her closed eyelids for a moment before she lets the day in. The air in the room is still, holding a faint trace of the fire from the night before, mixed with the quiet smell of fabric that has absorbed weeks of living. It is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, only familiar, like a tone the ear no longer questions after hearing it too often. She rises, letting her feet find the boards without looking. The jug feels lighter than she expects, and when she tips it over the basin, the water comes in a thin pour that still manages to ripple against the ceramic. The cloth dips into it, soaking unevenly, and she folds it once in her hands before pressing it to her face. The coolness is almost startling, and she holds it there long enough to feel her pulse against the damp. Then it moves down the side of her neck, over her shoulders, along her wrists. These small arcs of touch are like drawing a boundary between the night she has left and the hours that will follow. Outside, the street begins to sound itself awake. A cart passes more slowly than most, its wheels scraping in protest. A voice calls from one doorway to another, and a dog's bark carries down the narrow lane before fading into the layered hum that will build through the day. Elise sits at the table, the cloth folded neatly beside her, and lets the sounds rise around her without rushing to meet them. The pot of powder waits within reach, but she takes a few moments more, tracing the surface of the table with her fingertips, feeling the shallow grooves that speak of years of use by hands she has never known. When she does open the powder, the light catches in the fine dust before it touches her skin. She works it in with slow, precise motions along the hollow beneath her cheekbones, over the soft curve of her forehead, into the faint shadows under her eyes. The ribbon she chooses is narrow, the color of warm stone, and she ties it with the same quiet care she gives every morning. The knot rests lightly against her throat, its pressure a reminder of presence rather than restraint. By midday, the air outside has thickened with voices. The market's calls reach her in fragments, sometimes sharp, sometimes softened by distance. She steps into the doorway, placing herself where the light falls across one shoulder but leaves the other in shadow. The street's current moves past, carrying with it the smell of baked bread, the sharper tang of onions, the faint sweetness of fruit brought in from beyond the city walls. The first man to stop that day does so with a slowness that feels deliberate. He does not speak, only meets her gaze and waits. She tilts her head slightly, and that is enough. Inside, the door closes, sealing away the noise of the street. The air in the room seems to settle into its familiar stillness, the kind that has learned how to hold whatever happens within it. The exchange leaves no words behind, only the sound of the coin against the table, which she later adds to the small collection under her bed. She returns to the basin, wetting the cloth again even though the water has cooled. It moves over her skin in quiet arcs, lifting away what the last hour has left and replacing it with a surface that is ready again. The powder is touched up, the ribbon smoothed, and she stands once more in the shadowed frame of the doorway. The afternoon moves differently, less hurried, more watchful. The men who pass now carry the weight of a day behind them, their gazes slower, their choices more considered. A second man stops, this one younger, his glance flicking from her face to the threshold and back again. When he steps forward, it is with a kind of caution that does not linger once the door has closed. Inside, the room holds its steady air, absorbing another quiet moment into its walls. By evening, the street has taken on the looseness that comes with drink. Voices carry more freely now, laughter stretching wider. The smells have shifted again, ale foaming in mugs, meat crisping over flame, the faint char of bread at the edge of burning. Elise stands at her post, her gaze moving without hurry over the passing faces. When the last man of the night steps forward, she recognizes him from weeks before, not for any particular detail, but for the way he carries himself, as if the street is his to cross without question. When the door closes for the final time, the quiet inside feels heavier, more complete. The basin holds only a shallow pool now, but she dips the cloth one last time, pressing it to her face, her neck, the backs of her hands. The ribbon is unknotted, the powder closed away. The fire in the hearth has burned low, its glow folding the edges of the room into softness. She sits in that light for a while, listening to the street settle outside. Somewhere, a voice sings in fragments, not for anyone in particular, but simply because the night is long and there is still breath to fill it. Elise lets the sound drift in and out, her mind touching briefly on the thought of the bath that will come not as a wish, but as a fixed point on a path she is already walking. And when she lies down, the city's slow breathing carries her with it, both of them holding the quiet until morning finds them again. The light that comes now in the mornings feels rounder, fuller, as though the sun has grown confident in its place again. It creeps in at an angle that brushes across the floorboards, catches the curve of the basin, and climbs the wall until it fades into the dimness higher up. Elise wakes with it on her skin, the warmth barely there but different enough to notice. She turns her head slightly on the pillow, listening to the street before she moves. The first sounds are light, the shuffle of someone sweeping a threshold, the wooden clink of a pail being set down. No voices call yet, no wheels rumble. This is the quiet scene between night and the day's first stitch. She rises without thought, the way a hand might find its shape in the dark without needing to see. Her bare feet meet the floor with the same recognition they have every morning. She moves to the jug, tipping it into the basin until the water gathers in a shallow pool. The cloth dips into it, drinking slowly, and when she lifts it, it drips once against the wood before she presses it to her face. The cool is sharper now, the room's air holding a faint warmth that makes the dampness feel almost indulgent. She lets it rest there, then draws it down over her throat, her collarbone, the inside of her arms. These are the gestures that make no claim of cleansing, only of readiness. From outside, a faint murmur begins, the market preparing itself beyond the nearest bend in the lane. The sound grows by threads, weaving in the sharper crack of crates being opened, the rustle of sacks pulled across stone. Elise sets the cloth down, folded once, and opens the pot of powder. It rests in her palm with a familiarity that asks for no deliberation. She works it over her skin slowly, smoothing it into the places where light will find her later. The ribbon today is black, not the faded kind that has softened into gray, but the deep, unyielding black of fabric, kept aside for days when precision matters. She ties it so the knot sits evenly at her throat, fingers checking the fall of each end before she lets them drop. When she steps into the doorway, the street is shifting into its pace. Men and women pass with baskets, their glances either quick and dismissive or slow and measuring. She stands where she is both part of the frame and set apart from it, her figure half in shadow, half in light. The first man to pause that day is young, his eyes restless. He hesitates long enough for her to see the indecision flicker. Then he steps forward. Inside, the door closes, and the world narrows to the room's still air, the quiet exchange that leaves only the sound of coin against wood. She slips it into the box beneath her bed before returning to the basin. The cloth is still damp enough to lift some of the hour from her skin. She moves it along the line of her neck, the hollow of her elbows, then smooths the ribbon before returning to the doorway. The market's voice is fuller now, and the smell of bread drifts in under the tang of early ale from the taverns. The second man comes in the later part of the afternoon, when the street has slowed and the sun has shifted enough to pull the shadows long. His clothes are worn but not poor, and his eyes carry the steady gaze of someone who makes his choices without rush. She steps aside for him, the door closing on the sound of laughter spilling from somewhere down the lane. The air inside folds around him as it does for every visitor, taking on the shape of the moment without holding onto it when he leaves. The hours stretch toward evening, and the smells from the taverns deepen meat on the fire, bread crusted dark, the faint smoke from lamps being lit. Elise watches the men who pass now, their steps slower, their voices looser. The third to stop is familiar, though she cannot say from which day or which hour. Recognition here is often like that, a sense more than a memory. Inside, there are no words, only the low rhythm of movement and stillness until the door opens again to the street. By the time the night draws over the lane, the market's noise has faded entirely, replaced by the layered sounds of drink, song, and the occasional raised voice. Elise closes her door after the last man leaves, the latch falling into place with a sound that feels both final and ordinary. The basin's water is low now, but she dips the cloth one last time, pressing it to her face as though sealing the day's work away. The ribbon is untied, the powder closed, the fire in the hearth reduced to a soft, breathing glow. She sits for a time in that dimness, the quiet pressing gently at her ears. Outside, footsteps pass without stopping, and somewhere, someone hums a tune too low for the words to reach her. She lets her thoughts drift toward the bath that lies ahead in the month's turn, the heat, the steam, the way the air itself will feel lighter afterward. It is not longing, not exactly, more like a point of direction, fixed on the horizon whether she walks toward it or not. When she lies down, the air still carries the day in it, but the weight has softened, the street has quieted, the city's breathing slow and deep. She closes her eyes, letting that rhythm pull her towards sleep, knowing that morning will return her to the same walls, the same basin, the same doorway, and that she will meet it with the same unhurried certainty until the season shifts and the water finally waits for her. The day it comes is not announced with fanfare, nor marked by any grand change in the air, and yet Elise knows it before her eyes are even fully open. It is something in the way the light falls through the gap in the shutters, something in the looseness of the street's morning hum, the way the sounds drift in as if the world has been holding its breath and has only just decided to let it go. She lies there a moment longer, as though to savor the quiet before she steps into the sequence that has shaped her life for all these months. When she rises, there is no jug to tip, no basin to fill. Today, the water is not confined to that small circle of ceramic in the corner. Today it waits elsewhere, more of it than she will know what to do with, more than she has allowed herself to picture in all the weeks and nights that have led here. She moves through her room with the same measured care she gives to all her mornings, but beneath it runs a current that has nothing to do with habit. The black ribbon is left untouched, the pot of powder closed. They will not be needed until later. She steps into the street, and the air greets her differently, not because it is cleaner, but because it is moving. There is a soft, restless stirring in it, the kind that carries whispers and scents farther than usual. The cobblestones are damp from an earlier rain, darkened to near black, and the light bends itself against them in narrow, shifting lines. She follows the curve of the lane without hurry, her steps quiet, though inside her chest there is the faint, steady beat of something close to anticipation. The building stands as it always has, plain to anyone who does not know what waits inside. The door gives beneath her hand, and she steps into the dim warmth beyond it. Here the air is thicker, the smell of steam threading itself through the wooden beams, carrying with it the faint salt of skin and the clean, metallic edge of heated water. It is not the sweet scent one might dream of. This is not the perfumed bath of a noble, but it is enough to fill the lungs in a way that changes the rhythm of breath. The room itself is simple, the heat of the water doing the work that fire alone never could. She moves toward it slowly, her eyes catching on the ripples that shift and scatter the reflections on its surface. The first touch is only her hand, fingers breaking the skin of the water, feeling the warmth climb her knuckles, her wrist, until it rests against the hollow of her elbow. It is a warmth that feels alive, that reaches toward her as much as she reaches toward it. When she steps in, the sound is quiet, the water lifting around her, parting and closing again. It folds against her skin, finding the lines and hollows it has not touched in months. The weight of it is not heavy. It is the weight of being held, the weight of something large enough to take in everything she brings to it. She closes her eyes as it rises over her shoulders, and for the first time in longer than she cares to measure, the air she breathes feels unburdened. There is no rush to the washing. The cloth here is soft, the soap sharp in scent but not cruel to the skin. She moves slowly, not from hesitation but from the knowledge that each gesture is a kind of reclaiming. The water loosens what weeks of powder and cloth have hidden, lifts away the residue of smoke and closeness, leaves behind only the raw fact of skin in its own state. Her hair, heavy with the weight of it, clings for a moment before the water claims it, darkening it fully, making it new in color and feel. Time bends here. The minutes do not feel like they pass. They feel like they dissolve. She stays until the water has taken on the warmth of her own body, until the steam has eased from the air and settled into her bones. When she rises, the air against her damp skin is soft, the kind that makes the surface tingle as it dries. The towel is coarse but clean, its fibers catching at her in a way that feels almost like waking from sleep. She dresses in a gown that feels lighter than it should, the fabric meeting her skin without the weight of everything it had once carried. The ribbon she chooses is pale, nearly white, the knot tied with a care that feels like acknowledgement rather than habit. She steps back into the street, and for a moment it is as though the air has changed its mind about her. The same lane, the same cobblestones, the same curve of doorways, and yet the space between her and the world feels open in a way it has not in a long time. When she returns to her room, the basin in the corner is empty, and she lets it be. The fire in the hearth burns with a steady, low light, and she sits at the table, her hands resting loosely before her. The powder remains closed, the black ribbon coiled beside it. For tonight, they are not necessary. The street moves as it always does, the market swelling and fading, the taverns gathering their crowds. Men pass, some pausing, some moving on, and when one stops at her door, she meets him with the same steady presence she has always had. But there is something in the way she carries herself now, a small shift that needs no announcement. The air in the room, when the door closes, feels different, not because it is cleaner, but because she has brought something back with her from the water that no one can take away in a single night. And so it will begin again, the basin, the cloth, the powder, the ribbon, each day folding into the next. But somewhere ahead, the water waits once more, and she will walk toward it as she always does, without rush, without doubt. The seasons will turn, the street will breathe, and she will meet them both in her own time. And you, my friend, sitting here with me at the quiet edge of this, telling perhaps you can feel it too, the way history leaves its trace on the air around us, not as a weight, but as a texture. You've walked with her through the long months, stood in the doorway, felt the cool cloth against the skin, smelled the steam when it finally rose. You know now how a life can be marked not by the grand moments, but by the steady approach to the small ones that matter. So when the night is done and you find yourself returning to your own rhythm, remember that there is value in the unhurried, in the days that build towards something without rushing to meet it. And if you found some quiet in these moments with me, then perhaps you might come back tomorrow, to another doorway, another street, another life, waiting just behind it. There are always more stories folded into the corners of the past, and I will be here to walk them with you, as slowly as they deserve. Until then, rest well. Let the day fade gently, and let the water, whenever it comes for you, be as warm as it was for her. Good night.